All right, guys, let's talk about Queen Elizabeth being viewed as an anti-Semite posthumously. Yes, she is no longer with us, but it doesn't matter. They're still saying she's a giant anti-Semite. This story came out, and this was making the rounds. This comes from jewishnews.com, I guess, Jewish news organization. Former Israeli president claims Queen Elizabeth saw Israelis as terrorists. The former president of Israel said the relationship between us and Queen Elizabeth was a little bit difficult because she believed that every one of us was either a terrorist or a son of a terrorist. He added, she refused to accept any Israeli official into Buckingham Palace apart from international occasions. By comparison, he revealed that King Charles III was always so friendly. That's interesting. I think we should kind of ask, why is that? Asked by Jewish News to clarify his surprising comments, he stated, these are my words. This is what I said. Israel's 10th president made the unprecedented remark during a gala dinner commemorating 100 years of the Technion Institute of Technology held at the Royal Lancaster Hotel in London. King Charles twice visited Israel unofficially for the funerals of Shimon Peres and Yitzhak Rabin before undertaking an official visit in 2020. Queen Elizabeth II never visited Israel during her 70-year reign. You know, what's also really interesting is that, the whole Prince Andrew thing and the Epstein stuff. Yeah. So was Epstein and his blackmail operation able to get to the younger, the children of Queen Elizabeth? So she was fine, saying, look, you guys are terrorists and sons of terrorists. But then they were like, oh, really? Well, you got some sons. And we know how we can entice some of those sons into doing some things that are a little bit unsavory that'll work quite well in our blackmail scheme. So is that why King Charles is now so friendly to Israel when Queen Elizabeth wasn't? But let's unpack why Queen Elizabeth saw all Israelis as terrorists. Let's go over the history of Israel's terrorism campaigns throughout the United Kingdom. And we're also going to get into some of their terrorism for the United States and their more recent terrorism. But Israel is surely, there is no way to really there's no way to like sugarcoat the fact of the history of the creation of the state of Israel absolutely came through acts of terror. And so when we recognize the state of Israel as a legitimate state, what we're doing is we're saying that acts of terrorism can work, that acts of terrorism can lead to the creation of a state, and that's okay. And we have to kind of look at that as, is that a precedent we want to set? Is it just fact? And that you could say that the founding fathers of the United States of America were terrorists as well. They were committing acts of terror against the crown in order to get a free nation. You could say that, we always have the phrase of one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, but it doesn't negate the fact that the past actually happened. So let's go through some of it. One of the big ones was the King David Hotel bombing. This happened July 22nd of 1946. First of all, Queen Elizabeth was born in 1926, and she was coronated in 1952 at the age of 26. So throughout her entire lifetime that she can remember, by the time she was in her 20s and right before she took over the crown, that is when the Zionists, who were the future Israelis, started committing tons of acts of terrorism in order to get the creation of Israel going. So that is what she knew. That is what she experienced firsthand. So the King David Hotel bombing, July 22nd, 1946. This was led by Menachem, I'm not saying these names right. Ben, do you know how to say these names by chance? Menachem Bine. So Ergon was the name of the terrorist organization. The King David Hotel in Jerusalem housed the British Administrative Headquarters, Military Command and Police, and Irgun operatives disguised as Arab workers placed milk churns filled with explosives in the basement of the hotel. Warnings were reportedly sent to the British, but they were either ignored or did not reach the authorities in time. The explosion destroyed the southern wing of the hotel. The casualties of this terrorist attack, 91 were killed. That was 41 Arabs, 28 British, 17 Jews, and 5 others, and 46 injured. This act is often considered the deadliest attack against British forces during the Mandate. It shocked the British government and the international community. So this was during Palestine under the British Mandate, and this Zionist terrorist organization, Irgun, bombed the hotel and killed a bunch of people. Another one was the Sergeant's Affair. This happened in July of 1947. Also the same perpetrator, Irgun. The target was British soldiers Clifford Martin and Mervyn Pace. The soldiers were kidnapped in retaliation for the planned execution of 3 Irgun members, probably because the Irgun members committed the bombing of the King David Hotel. Despite efforts to negotiate their release, the British carried out the executions, and in response, Irgun hanged the 2 sergeants and left their booby-trapped bodies in a eucalyptus grove. So they killed the guys and booby-trapped their bodies. The incident caused outrage in Britain and escalated hostilities, and the bodies were returned to Britain with full military honors. There was also the Night of the Trains, November 1st of 1945. British railway lines across Palestine were the target. This was another couple of Zionist militant groups that perpetrated this. Over 50 sites were attacked simultaneously, destroying tracks, trains, and signaling equipment. The aim was to disrupt British control over transportation and communication networks. The operation marked the beginning of a larger campaign of sabotage. So they started doing tons of sabotage campaigns all throughout. There were limited casualties on this, but there was a lot of widespread disruption. Then there was the letter bomb campaign. This was in 1947. Bombs were sent in parcels to British officials in both Palestine and the UK. Targets included prominent British politicians like Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin, who was seen as hostile to Jewish immigration. Many bombs were intercepted before reaching their targets. This was unsuccessful. There were very few fatalities. There were no fatalities or casualties. The campaign increased tension between the groups, between Zionist groups and Great Britain. There was also the Acre prison break. This was in May of 1947. The target was Acre Prison, which held numerous Jewish and Arab political prisoners. Irgun fighters smuggled explosives into the prison and detonated them to blow a hole in the wall. 41 prisoners escaped, including Irgun and Lehi members. British forces pursued the escapees, killing 9, capturing most of the others. The raid was seen as a bold act of resistance, but it had limited strategic success. Then there was the assassination of Lord Moyne. This was in 1944. The Stern Gang did this one. The target was Lord Moyne, British Minister of State in the Middle East. Moyne was shot in Cairo by 2 Lehi operatives. The assassination was motivated by Moyne's perceived opposition to Jewish immigration and his role in British policy in Palestine. So immigration into Palestine. When they say against Jewish immigration, they mean into Palestine, very specifically. Both assassins were captured and they were executed. The killing strained relations between the British government and Zionist leadership. There was the Haifa oil refinery attack of 1947. British-controlled oil refinery was the target. Bombs were placed in the refinery to disrupt British economic and logistical operations. Several Arab and British workers were killed in the explosion. This, of course, escalated tensions even more between the groups. Bombing of British Air Force bases in 1946. Irgun and Lehi did this one. Coordinated attacks in British Air Force installations, including airfields and maintenance facilities. They sabotaged operations aimed to weaken the British military in the region. So they were committing acts of sabotage against the British military. There was the railway station bombings of 1946, putting more bombs around railways. They had the Operation Agatha in 1946, which was British conducted mass arrests of Zionist leaders. And then there was a retaliation. So when the British went and arrested a lot of these terrorists, retaliation was that they started to increase sabotage and assassinations. The Zionists started doing more sabotage and assassination attacks against the British. There was the British police station bombings of 1946 and 1947. These are police stations where the British obviously were housing themselves, and they were targeted with bombs and gunfire. In one notable incident, Irgun attacked the Sarona police station in Tel Aviv, killing several officers. Then there was the Night of the Bridges in 1946. Palmach operatives destroyed 11 bridges connecting Palestine to neighboring countries to isolate British forces. There was minimal casualties, but the operation showcased Haganah's organizational capability. So you see, there was a lot of terrorism that was enacted against the British, and right before the British just threw up their hands and said, all right, fine, we'll partition the place. The Jews can have one side, the Arabs could have the other. We're out of here. So this is why the British said, we're out of here. A lot of people are under the impression that the British said, we're going to divide this up because we feel bad for the Jews. The Holocaust was terrible. We feel bad for the Jews. We feel like they should have a home, a safe place for themselves. So out of the goodness of our hearts and because of World War II, yes, let's just go ahead and do this because it's a good thing to do. And in reality, what happened was all of these terrorist attacks caused the British to say, that's it, we're out of here. We can't suffer like this anymore. These people are insane. And so we're just going to throw up our hands and leave the problem with the Arabs, unfortunately, is what they basically said, which is they're not our problem anymore. They're your problem. They want your land. You're going to have to deal with them. Here, we're kind of going to partition it up. Maybe you guys can stay on that side. They can stay on that side. And good luck to you. We're out. That's really what happened. That's the real story of the creation of Israel. It isn't because of the Holocaust. It's because of terrorism. That's what caused it. Now, going forward, let's look at some more of the terrorism that these groups did, this time against Palestinians. So they weren't only terrorizing the British, they were also terrorizing the Palestinians at the same time. There was the Deir Yassin massacre. This was in April of 1948. The target was a Palestinian village of Deir Yassin near Jerusalem. Over 100 armed members of Irgun and Lehi attacked the village of approximately 600 people. The attack involved gunfire, grenades, house-to-house fighting. Many villagers were killed, including women, children, and elderly individuals. Some accounts report mutilations and atrocities. There were 107 to 254, the estimates range, from 107 to 254 Palestinians killed. Deir Yassin is one of the most infamous incidents during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. News of the massacre spread fear among Palestinian communities, leading to mass displacement. So when they heard about this, it caused, what the Israelis did is they went in there and they created such horrific scenes and crimes that word got out to the other Palestinians, and many of them just said, "That's it, we're leaving. We're not going to have that happen to us." And it essentially did what they were looking to do, which was clear the land of the Palestinians. The Lida and Ramel massacres of July of 1948, the IDF. So at this point, Israel was a country. So now it's official. The IDF, including units under the command of Yitzhak Rabin. The target was Palestinian towns of Lod and Ramel. During Operation Danny, Israeli forces captured Lida, which is Lod, and Ramel. Soldiers executed dozens of Palestinians, including civilians, forcibly expelled tens of thousands of residents. Survivors were forced to march toward the West Bank without food or water in what became known as the Lida Death March. Over 250 were killed, with many others dying during the expulsion. These events were part of the larger Nakba, during which over 700,000 Palestinians were displaced. Then there was the Tantura massacre. This one's pretty famous. You might have seen the clip of the old man laughing, talking about raping and killing young girls. This is from the Tantura that clip is him talking about the Tantura massacre. So the perpetrators were the IDF. The Palestinian coastal village of Tantura was targeted. Israeli forces attacked the village as part of an operation to secure the Haifa-Tel Aviv corridor. Dozens and possibly hundreds of unarmed villagers were executed. Others were expelled. Mass graves were reportedly dug to bury the victims. Eyewitness accounts suggest up to 200 men were killed, and Tantura remains a controversial subject in Israeli historiography. They don't want to talk about it. Saf massacre. This was October of 1948. IDF forces went into a Palestinian village in the Galilee. After capturing the village during Operation Hiram, Israeli forces reportedly executed dozens of villagers. Women were reportedly raped. Men were tied up and shot. Around 70 men were executed. Multiple reports of sexual violence. Saf was depopulated and its inhabitants were completely displaced. Then there was the Kafr Qassam massacre of October 29th, 1956. So now we're getting into the 50s. So they were all throughout the 40s, terrorizing the British, terrorizing the Palestinians. Now we move on into the 50s. You've got the Israeli border police going after Palestinian villagers in Kafr Qasim inside of Israel on the eve of the Suez crisis. Israeli authorities imposed a curfew in Arab villages near the Jordanian border. Villages returning from work were unaware of the curfew. Israeli border police opened fire on them. 48 villagers were killed, including women and children. The massacre caused outrage and remains a symbol of oppression for Palestinians. And it just continued on for decades and decades after that. They're still doing these types of things. Semiramis hotel bombing, January 1948. This was another hotel. They claim the Haganah bombed the hotel, claiming it was being used as headquarters for Arab fighters. The attack destroyed the building, killed many civilians. Over 20 civilians were killed. In 1948, in April, there was also the al-Husseini family assassination. Al-Husseini was killed during a skirmish with Jewish forces at the village of Kastal. His death demoralized Palestinian fighters, contributed to the loss of the Kastal area. There was the Damash Mosque massacre in 1948. Following the capture of Lydia, which is Lod, during the Operation Danny, IDF soldiers attacked the mosque where dozens of Palestinians had sought refuge. They used grenades and gunfire to kill those inside. At least 80 people were killed. Then there was the Ain al-Zoutan massacre in 1948. After capturing the village, Palmach forces executed over 30 men who had been taken prisoner. The village was depopulated and destroyed. Approximately 30 to 70 people were executed in total. There was the Al-Dawaima massacre. The IDF forces went into the Palestinian village of Al-Dawaima near Hebron. Following the capture of the village, Israeli forces executed civilians, including women and children. Eyewitness accounts report atrocities, including babies being killed and homes being destroyed. The estimates range from 80 to 200 killed. There was the Haifa market bombings between 1937 and 1939. During the Arab Revolt, Irgun carried out a series of bombings targeting Arab markets and public places. The attacks aimed to retaliate against Arab resistance and intimidate the Palestinian population. Dozens were killed, many were injured. There was the Yehida massacre in 1947. The Haganah forces attacked the village of Yehida, killing civilians, destroying homes. At least 13 were killed. So again, like a long pattern and history of violence and terrorism against the British, against the Palestinians. So of course, Queen Elizabeth, as she's in her formative years about to take the crown, sees this act of terror after act of terror after act of terror after act of terror. And she's thinking, you guys are a bunch of terrorists. Israel was created by terrorists. And so Israelis that are there, these are terrorists and the children of terrorists. Because all you've done, it's not just, oh, one bad attack or two bad attacks. This is dozens and dozens and dozens of examples of them committing acts of terror, shaping the mental consciousness of the Queen into these people are a bunch of terrorists. And it wasn't just the British or the Palestinians that the Zionists committed acts of terror. They also committed acts of terror against Americans. Let's go over some of the American attacks. There was the Lavon affair in 1954. The target was U.S. and British facilities in Egypt. A covert operation known as Operation Susanna involved Israeli agents planting bombs in American and British civilian sites, including libraries and cultural centers in Egypt. The goal was to frame Egyptian nationalists and create tension between Egypt and the Western powers. So that sneaky false flag stuff's been going on for a long time. The operation was exposed when one of the operatives was captured. The scandal led to the resignation of Israeli Defense Minister Lavon and strained U.S.-Israeli relations. Not well enough, clearly. The USS Liberty incident. This has been getting a lot of news lately, but during the Six-Day War, Israeli aircraft and torpedo boats attacked the USS Liberty in international waters. The ship was bombed, torpedoed. Israel claimed the attack was a mistake. Oops, our bad. Alleging they believed the ship was Egyptian. Sure. Survivors and some of the U.S. officials argue it was a deliberate attack to prevent the ship from intercepting communications about Israeli military operations. 34 Americans were killed. 171 were wounded. There was also the assassination of Alex Oda in 1985. Alex Oda was a regional director of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. He was killed by a bomb rigged to his office door in Santa Ana, California. So the attacks came all the way over here to the United States. The JDL, a militant Zionist organization, was suspected of orchestrating the attack due to Oda's criticism of Israeli policies. They investigated this. They were never able to really pin it but there's still been very, very strong suspicions that the Israelis were behind that. There was a 1983 bombing of U.S. Marines in Lebanon. This was not done by the Israelis, but apparently Mossad knew about it and did not warn America, which is what a lot of people criticize and believe happened with 9/11, that the Israelis knew about it, didn't warn America. Maybe even had a hand, there are people out there that think that Israel had a hand in it. But I think more people suspect that Israel at least knew about it and did not warn the United States, but instead we're happy to see it happen so that we would then go over to the Middle East and start waging wars on their behalf. This was a truck bomb that killed 241 U.S. Marines in their barracks. And reports and former U.S. officials say that Israel had intelligence about potential attacks in Lebanon, but they didn't share it with the U.S. They prioritized their own strategic interests instead of the United States law, instead of American lives. And they killed Americans in order to get their goals accomplished. And that's kind of the theme always, is whatever, we'll just sacrifice you to get our goals. That's not really a true ally or friendship. An ally is an allegiance. There's no allegiance. There's no friend here when the friend is just really selfishly always looking after themselves. There was the Jonathan Pollard spy case of the 80s. This was an Israeli intelligence. Jonathan Pollard was a U.S. Navy intelligence analyst, and he was caught spying for Israel. He passed thousands of classified documents to Israeli intelligence, damaging U.S. national security. Israel initially denied it, but then later admitted that, yeah, he's one of ours. So Israel was spying on the United States, getting information from the U.S. to Israel. Some friend, our greatest ally, right? Our greatest ally. There was the Israeli settlement activity of U.S. citizen victims. Palestinian Americans have been killed or injured during Israeli military operations or by settler violence in the West Bank. There was, of course, Rachel Corrie. We know about that. We've had several more recently. There's also been the sabotage of the U.S. brokered peace process of the 90s. This was the Israeli extremists opposed the Oslo Accords, and they carried out attacks, including the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995. So they assassinated their own prime minister for trying to make peace with the Palestinians. And that's why we don't have any, that's why they're still fighting it out, why the Palestinians keep saying it's not our fault, it's theirs, because it is, when they have done everything they can to take the land and disrupt any sort of peace process whatsoever, including assassinating their own people. And then there's just been the various Israeli espionage operations against the United States. We've got multiple cases of espionage by Israel have been uncovered, including surveillance of U.S. officials during negotiations or policy discussions. They spy on us. Nobody seems to hold them accountable for that. In 2010, reports emerged of Israel attempting to monitor White House communications during the Obama administration. So this isn't even many years past. This is even recent. Spying during the Obama administration. Of course, you've got the Epstein scandal that has definitely entrapped many of our politicians and powerful people. So, this is our best friend. We love abuse. We love it. We love being abused by our friends. This is the type of friend we love and want to keep. And they are our best friend, the type that just abuse us and use us and look out for themselves more than they look out for us. It's just, that's what the United States has accepted. So not only did the Queen view Israelis as terrorists or the children of terrorists, which that is not true anymore. I do believe that was probably, there was probably a lot of, certainly the people in power in Israel are terrorists or the children of terrorists or whatever, like the people who are in power. But if you're a child of a terrorist, that's not really your fault. So I don't even count that. But certainly the people in the government, especially the early government of Israel, were terrorists. They knew about all of this. They supported all of this. This is how they got their country. But I think there were a lot of Jews were duped into coming to Israel. I think there was a big campaign because you can't have a country if you don't have people. You need people to be there so that you can rule over the people and have a nation. So I think there were a lot of nice, normal Jewish people that were duped into believing, hey, Israel's your homeland. This is the safest place for you to be. Come back to your homeland, which is, by the way, another amount of bullshit. Jews have also been expelled from Israel multiple times. So this whole notion of Jews are going to have a land where Jews can finally be safe, it's like, okay, except for the history of where you've been expelled actually more times from the Holy Land than pretty much any other place in the world. You've been expelled from this place. So what makes you think being there isn't going to lead to the same fate that you've had several times before? You're just going to get expelled from the land eventually. But nonetheless, I think a lot of people have been duped into being told that this is where it's our homeland. This is where we'll finally be safe. We won't have things like the Holocaust happen to us. So come and start a new life in Israel. And I think a lot of them did. I think a lot decided that that's what they wanted to do. They thought it sounded like a really good idea, and that they had nothing to lose really. And so they went for that. But that being said, I think that Queen Elizabeth had a point, and there was definitely a lot of terrorism and whatnot.